The early morning sun rose slowly over the wide lands of the American Southwest, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. The desert air was cool at first, but everyone knew that in just a few hours, the heat would take over the land. In this quiet place, where tall red rocks stood like old guardians, and the wind carried the faint sound of distant birds, a young Apache woman named Nadina walked with calm steps. She had always lived close to nature, understanding the meaning of every sound and movement around her. Nadina had been traveling with a large group of her people who were being guided to a new area chosen by officials. It was a long journey, filled with confusion, long waits, and constant instructions that Nadina did not always understand. Many languages were spoken: English, Spanish, and different native dialects, but very few truly listened to the Apache words she knew best. Even so, she kept her spirit steady. Her grandmother had once told her, "A strong heart speaks, even when the mouth cannot." Nadina held on to that wisdom. During one part of the journey, the group stopped at a large government station where families were checked and counted. People stood in lines, waiting for their names to be written down. Some families were kept together, while others were moved into different rooms for questions. Officials asked for names, ages, and relationships. Many people did not understand the questions. Some tried to explain through gestures, but misunderstandings still happened. In the middle of all this confusion, Nadina became separated from her own relatives. She had stepped aside to help an older woman who was struggling with her belongings. When Nadina returned to the area where her family had been standing, she found the space empty. People were being moved quickly from one area to another, and the officials told her that the group she was looking for had been taken to the other side of the station. She hurried there, but by the time she arrived, her family had already been placed onto a wagon leaving for another checkpoint. Nadina tried to follow, but the officials told her to wait so they could check her records. She spoke little English, and they spoke almost no Apache. The more she tried to explain, the more confused the officials became. They asked for documents she did not have, papers she had never seen before. They repeated questions she could not understand, and slowly, without intention or malice, they marked her name as unclaimed, a word she did not understand but felt uneasy about. By the end of the day, Nadina was taken to a small room near the administrative building. She was not treated poorly, but she was watched closely because the officials were unsure what to do with her. They placed her into a group of individuals whose identities or connections were unclear. Some were children who had been separated from their parents. Some were elders who could not speak the officials' language. Others were like Nadina, alone, but hopeful that someone would return for them. Days passed. Nadina remained calm on the outside, though her heart carried a quiet worry. Each morning, she looked toward the distant roads, hoping to see her family approaching. She believed in them. She believed they would ask for her. She believed her people would not leave without her. But each day ended the same way, with no familiar faces in sight. The station workers were not unkind, but they were overwhelmed by the number of people passing through. They had long lists, stacks of papers, and many questions that needed answers. Nadina noticed that they did not see her as a person with a story. To them, she was another name on a list, another responsibility, another task to complete. Sometimes she heard them talk, not with cruelty but with exhaustion. "She's still on the unclaimed list," one officer would say. "We'll figure it out tomorrow," another would reply. Tomorrow kept coming, and nothing changed. Even so, Nadina refused to lose hope. She spent her time sitting near the window, watching the vast land stretching far beyond the station. She listened to the wind and the distant call of birds. Nature reminded her that everything moved in cycles, and no situation stayed the same forever. Her presence at the station soon became noticed by the workers and by visitors from the nearby towns. Whenever a delivery wagon arrived or a traveler passed through, they would sometimes glance toward the quiet woman sitting with straight posture and calm eyes. People began whispering about her: who she was, where she came from, why she was alone. Some spoke with curiosity, saying, "Is she really the last Apache woman here? I've never seen one before." Others spoke with simple wonder. "She looks so peaceful." Some whispered with assumptions. Maybe her family forgot her. But Nadina paid no attention to these voices. She knew her family would never abandon her. She trusted in her roots, her lineage, and the strength of her ancestors. Still, the rumors continued to spread. They traveled from person to person, from the station to the town, and soon many people knew about the unclaimed woman with the calm eyes. Her story, though incomplete and often misunderstood, captured people's attention. Some felt sympathy, others curiosity, and a few simply liked to repeat stories without knowing the truth. One afternoon, an older station worker named Mrs. Collins approached Nadina with a warm smile. She had taken a gentle interest in her, offering small gestures of kindness whenever she could. She would bring her a blanket on cooler nights or a cup of warm tea when the evenings grew quiet. Mrs. Collins spoke slowly, as though hoping her words might somehow cross the language barrier. "Someone will come for you," she said one day, placing a comforting hand over her own chest to show warmth. "Someone always does." Nadina did not understand the sentence fully, but she understood the kindness in the woman's eyes and nodded with gratitude. Sometimes Mrs. Collins would sit near her and talk about the weather, the days growing shorter, or the new people arriving at the station. Nadina listened. Not to the words, but to the tone. The soft way the woman spoke revealed her good intentions. Evenings at the station were quiet. The sun would set behind the distant hills, and the sky would turn a deep shade of purple. Shadows stretched across the land, and lanterns flickered in the halls. Nadina would lie on her small bed, thinking about her people, imagining their faces, their voices, and the songs they used to sing at night. These memories brought comfort to her heart. She also thought about the future. She did not know what tomorrow held, but she refused to let fear take root. She believed that every person had a path, and even if that path was unclear, it still led somewhere meaningful. One night, she dreamed of her grandmother. In the dream, the old woman stood on a hill, wearing the traditional Apache blanket, with patterns that symbolized strength and endurance. Her grandmother smiled at her and raised her hand gently toward the sky, as if pointing toward something important far in the distance. When Nadina woke up, she felt calm and strengthened by the dream. She believed it was a sign to remain patient. The next morning, she looked out the window longer than usual. She didn't know why, but she felt something different in the air, as if a small change was coming. She watched travelers passing, wagons rolling by, workers preparing for another long day. Everything looked normal, but inside her heart, she sensed a shift. She did not yet know that miles away, a lonely farmer named Samuel Wade had heard about her and felt a deep stirring of concern, a feeling that would soon lead him to the station, and eventually, to a decision that would change both their lives. But for now, Nadina sat quietly, with her hands folded gently around a clay bead necklace her mother had given her years ago. She held it close, letting its smooth shape remind her of home. Though the world around her seemed uncertain, she remained steady, like a tree rooted firmly in the soil, waiting for the right season to grow again. Far from the busy government station where Nadina waited, the land stretched quietly across the countryside. Open fields swayed softly with the morning breeze, and the sound of wind brushing through dry grass created a calm rhythm. In this peaceful corner of the Southwest lived a man named Samuel Wade, a farmer known throughout the nearby town for his quiet ways and steady hands. Samuel had inherited a small patch of land from his father years ago. It was not large, not famous, and not especially rich with crops, but it was enough to give him purpose. Every day, he woke before sunrise, pulled on his worn boots, and stepped outside to greet the day. His routine rarely changed. He cared for his chickens, checked the fence, watered the vegetable rows, and prepared feed for his horse, Rusty. The work was simple but honest, and it kept his mind steady. Samuel had once shared this land with his wife, Maria, a gentle woman who loved planting flowers along the fence line. She had brought color into his life and filled their home with laughter. When she passed away a few years earlier, the farmhouse fell quiet. The flowers eventually dried out, and the house seemed larger than before, as if the empty rooms carried the echo of someone who should still be there. After her passing, Samuel threw himself into his work. He kept the farm running, not because he especially needed to, but because it was the only thing that made the long days feel manageable. His neighbors often invited him for dinner, and sometimes he would go, but mostly he preferred the quiet of his own home. It was easier to think in silence. One warm afternoon, Samuel loaded a small cart with fresh vegetables and eggs to take to town. The marketplace was always lively, merchants shouting, children laughing, and travelers coming and going. Though Samuel usually preferred the stillness of his farm, he didn't mind visiting town once in a while. People respected him and often relied on his produce, praising the quality of his eggs or the sweetness of his carrots. At the market, he set up his stall as he always did. A few customers approached, exchanging friendly greetings. But what caught his attention that day were the voices of two men talking loudly near the well. Their conversation wasn't directed at him, but certain words reached his ears clearly. "She's still at that station," one man said. "They say she's been sitting there for weeks now, alone." "I heard she's Apache," the other man replied. "An unclaimed woman, that's what they call her." Samuel wasn't one to listen to gossip, but something about the way they spoke made him look up. The tone wasn't harsh, just casual, almost careless. But the idea of someone being left alone at a government station without family, without choice, pulled at him unexpectedly. He tried to return to his work, arranging the vegetables neatly so customers could see them. But the conversation continued, drifting through the air like a story carried by the wind. "They don't know what to do with her," one man continued. "They keep her inside the station most of the time." "That poor woman," a nearby lady murmured. "Imagine being all alone like that." Samuel's hands stilled. The idea struck a tender part of him, the part that knew what loneliness felt like, how heavy it could sit in the heart, how quiet it made the world seem. As he packed up his stall later that day, the words still lingered in his mind. He had come to town for a simple purpose, yet he returned home with a feeling he could not ignore. That night, Samuel sat on his porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, spreading warmth across the farm. Rusty, his old horse, grazed quietly nearby. Even with the calm around him, Samuel's thoughts felt unsettled. He wondered about the woman the townspeople had mentioned. Who was she? How had she come to be alone? Did she understand what was happening to her? Samuel wasn't sure why he felt so drawn to her situation. Perhaps it was the memory of Maria, who had always encouraged him to show kindness. Perhaps it was the loneliness that he still carried, the kind that made him sensitive to the idea of someone else feeling lost. Or maybe it was simply his nature, gentle, thoughtful, unwilling to let another person feel forgotten. The following morning, Samuel tried to return to his routine. He fed the animals, checked the water troughs, and fixed a loose plank on the barn wall. But all throughout the morning, a quiet urge pulled at him, telling him he needed to go to the station and see the situation for himself. Not to interfere, not to judge, simply to understand. By afternoon, he made up his mind. He washed his hands, changed into a clean shirt, and saddled Rusty. The station was not very far, about an hour's ride, but Samuel had never visited it before. He had always assumed it was a place for officials and paperwork, not somewhere he would ever need to go. The ride was calm. The road stretched ahead, lined with tall desert plants swaying under the warm sun. Birds flew low over the fields. Rusty walked steadily, as if sensing that this was no ordinary trip. As Samuel approached the station, he saw groups of people waiting outside, families resting under the shade of the few trees in the area, travelers passing through, and officials speaking with workers. The building itself stood modest but busy. Samuel tied Rusty to a post and walked toward the entrance. He felt a strange nervousness, though he wasn't sure why. He wasn't here to cause trouble. He just needed to see things clearly. Inside, he found a desk where a tired-looking officer sat filling out papers. "Excuse me," Samuel said softly. The officer looked up, surprised to see a visitor who didn't seem to have any official business. "Yes, what can I help you with?" Samuel hesitated, unsure how to explain without sounding like a man following gossip. "I heard that there is a woman here," he began slowly. "Someone who hasn't been claimed yet. Someone who hasn't been claimed yet." The officer let out a long sigh. Not annoyed but simply exhausted. "Yes, there is," he answered. "She's been here for some time now. We're trying to sort out her information." "Why is she unclaimed?" Samuel asked carefully. "It's complicated," the officer replied. "She became separated from her people during transfer. We haven't been able to match her to any group yet. She speaks very little English, and our translators only know a little of her language, so she stays here until we figure out what to do." Samuel nodded thoughtfully. He didn't push further. He simply asked, "May I see her? Just from a distance?" The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded. "As long as you don't disturb her." He led Samuel down a hallway with several rooms used for temporary stays. When they reached a door with a window, the officer pointed. "There." Samuel stepped closer. Inside the room sat a woman with long, dark hair tied neatly behind her head. Her posture was straight, dignified, and calm. She sat near the window, her gaze directed outside toward the open land. She looked peaceful, not troubled or afraid, just quietly waiting. Samuel felt something shift inside him. He could not explain it, but seeing her in person made the rumors feel painfully real. She was not a story. She was not a whisper or a phrase repeated in town. She was a human being, alone, patient, and far from home. "She doesn't cause any trouble," the officer said softly. "She's very gentle. Just alone." Samuel understood that feeling more than he wished to admit. He stood there for a long moment, his heart weighing heavier with each passing second. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched through the window, feeling a quiet empathy grow inside him. Before leaving, he thanked the officer and walked outside into the sunlight. Rusty lifted his head, sensing his presence. Samuel placed a hand on the horse's neck, but his mind was far away. On the long ride home, thoughts swirled inside him like dust carried by the wind. He didn't know what he could do, or what he should do, but he knew one thing for certain. He could not forget the look of calm patience in the woman's eyes. It stayed with him long after the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear in the sky. And deep inside, he felt a small but certain truth forming. Something was pulling him toward a decision that would soon change both his life and hers. The next morning arrived quietly at Samuel Wade's small farm, but his thoughts were far from calm. He woke before dawn as usual, yet everything felt different. His routine followed its normal path, feeding the chickens, checking the fences, watering the crops, but his mind kept wandering back to the government station and the woman he had seen sitting by the window with such gentle silence. Her calm eyes, her patient posture, her quiet presence, everything about her stayed with him as if he had known her for years instead of a few minutes. He could not understand why he felt such a strong pull, but it was there, steady and persistent. Throughout the early hours, he tried to focus on the chores, but he kept remembering how she gazed out the window, not with fear or anger, but with a deep, steady hope. She had looked like someone waiting not for rescue, but for clarity, for connection, for a simple chance to step outside the walls, holding her back. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel sat at his small wooden table, drinking his morning tea. He held the warm cup between his hands, staring into the rising steam. He wondered what she must be thinking at this very moment. Was she looking out the same window? Was she wondering if her family would ever return for her? Did she even know why she had been kept there for so long? He sighed softly. He had always been a practical man, not someone who acted on sudden impulses. But this situation felt different. There was a gentle weight on his heart, guiding him toward a decision he could not ignore. By mid-morning, he stood up, placed his cup aside, and walked out of the house with determined steps. He saddled Rusty again, patting the horse's neck as though explaining that today's trip was more important than the last. Rusty snorted softly, as if he understood. The ride to the station was peaceful. The road stretched long and empty, leading toward the open land where the station sat like a lone point of activity. The warm breeze brushed against Samuel's face, lifting a few strands of his hair and carrying them backward. The rhythmic sound of Rusty's hooves gave him time to think more deeply about what he wanted to do. When Samuel reached the station, it was slightly busier than the day before. Families waited outside. Children sat near the steps, and officials walked back and forth carrying papers. The familiar mixture of voices filled the air. He tied Rusty in the same spot as before and walked inside. The officer from yesterday recognized him and raised his eyebrows with mild surprise. "You're back," the officer said. Samuel nodded politely. "Yes. If it's all right, I'd like to see her again." The officer paused, studying Samuel with thoughtful curiosity. But he saw nothing troubling in Samuel's expression, only sincerity and worry, so he nodded. "Come this way." Samuel followed him down the hallway. The officer opened the door a little wider this time, allowing Samuel a closer look. Nadina sat in the same position as before, but the light from the window fell differently across her face today, making her expression appear softer. She turned her head slightly when she sensed movement. Her eyes met Samuel's through the doorway. For a moment, neither of them looked away. She didn't smile, but she didn't seem uncomfortable either. Her gaze was gentle, steady, curious. "Has she spoken to anyone?" Samuel asked quietly. "Only a few words," the officer replied. "She mostly keeps to herself. We tried to ask for information, but communication is difficult." Samuel hesitated, then asked, "Is there a translator? Someone who knows her language?" "There's one man," the officer said. "He's not fluent, but he knows basic Apache phrases. We can ask him to help if you'd like to speak with her." Samuel nodded immediately. The officer left to find the translator, and Samuel remained near the doorway, watching Nadina calmly as she sat with quiet dignity. She did not appear troubled by his presence. In fact, she seemed to recognize the kindness in his expression. Soon, the translator arrived, a younger man with warm eyes and a notebook in his hand. He greeted Samuel politely, then stepped inside the room with him. Nadina watched them both quietly. Samuel greeted her with a gentle nod. The translator quickly explained to her, in slow and simple Apache phrases, that the man standing before her was friendly and wanted to speak with her. Nadina looked at Samuel again, her eyes softening just a little. She placed a hand on her chest in a respectful greeting, and Samuel mirrored the gesture to show respect and good intentions. Through the translator, Samuel asked simple questions: first her name, how she was feeling, whether she needed anything. Nadina responded with short phrases, careful and calm. Her voice was soft but steady. She told him her name. She told him she was waiting for news of her people. She said she did not understand why she had been kept inside the station for so long, but she believed the world would guide her path eventually. Samuel listened to every word. Something about her quiet strength touched him deeply. She did not complain. She did not express fear. She simply waited with patience and trust, a kind of trust he had not seen in a long time. At the end of their brief conversation, Samuel thanked her and stepped outside with the translator. The officer waited nearby, curious about the result. "She seems very kind," Samuel said quietly. "She is," the officer agreed. "That's part of why this situation feels difficult. She deserves better than sitting here with no direction." Samuel felt a deep sadness at the thought of her being stuck in a system that did not understand her or her culture. But he also felt something stronger: responsibility, compassion, and a quiet resolve building inside him. He cleared his throat. "What will happen if no one claims her?" The officer shook his head slowly. "She'll stay here under supervision until a decision is made. But honestly, we don't know how long that might take." Zen. Samuel felt a tightening in his chest. Weeks? Months? How long could a person wait like that? "Is there a way," he asked carefully, "for a citizen to take responsibility for her? To give her freedom until she can decide her next steps?" The officer looked at him with surprise. "It's possible," he admitted. "There's a formal process. There's a fee for the paperwork and some guidelines you'd have to follow. But yes, it can be done. Samuel stood still, letting the officer's words settle in his mind. The idea seemed large, heavy, and unexpected. Yet it also felt right, like a quiet answer to the restlessness he had been feeling. He nodded slowly. I'd like to know the details. The officer explained the process. It wasn't simple. But it was not impossible either. It required signing documents, paying a fee, and confirming that the person would be treated with care and given freedom, not ownership, not control, just support and safety, until she chose her own path. As Samuel listened, he felt a deep clarity forming. He wasn't acting out of pity or impulse. He was acting because something inside him recognized something inside her: strength, patience, and a quiet loneliness that mirrored his own. He thanked the officer and left the station. Rusty waited patiently as Samuel placed a hand on the horse's neck and breathed deeply. The ride home was quiet. No dust storm, no wind. Only the sound of hooves, and Samuel's thoughts turning into a steady decision. That night, Samuel sat at his wooden table again, staring at the old photograph of his wife, Maria. She smiled gently in the picture, just as she always had in life. He remembered her words, spoken years ago. Whenever you can offer kindness, do it. You never know how far it can reach. Samuel felt as if she were speaking to him now. The next morning, he saddled Rusty once more. But this time his steps were filled with purpose. He rode straight to the station with a calm, determined heart. He approached the officer, took a steady breath, and said, "I want to pay whatever is needed to free her." The officer stared for a moment, almost surprised, into silence. But then he nodded, understanding the sincerity in Samuel's voice. And with that simple sentence, with one act of gentle courage, Samuel set in motion a change that would transform not only Nadina's future, but his own. The last part of Zion's journey began quietly. After everything he had gone through, he felt a strange mix of fear, hope, and responsibility. His life had changed so many times, in so many unexpected ways, that he no longer believed anything was permanent. But he still believed in one thing. A person should keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the road feels. He reminded himself of this every morning when he woke up and every night before he went to sleep. When Zion returned to his hometown, he felt things were not the same anymore. The streets, which once felt familiar, now felt different. The people he met looked at him with new eyes, as if they could sense he had changed. Some welcomed him warmly, while others stayed silent, unsure of what to say. But Zion didn't blame anyone. He understood that life moves at its own speed, and not everyone knows how to react to someone who has experienced so much. He spent the first few weeks quietly, helping his family with daily tasks. He would wake up early, help his father with the shop, assist his mother with small chores, and spend time with his younger siblings. These simple things brought him peace. After months of constant pressure and challenges, these small routines felt like gifts. But even while doing ordinary work, his mind wandered. He often thought about the moments that shaped him, the people he met, the mistakes he made, the lessons he learned, and the dreams that were still waiting for him. One evening, while Zion was closing the shop, an old teacher passed by. She stopped and looked at him closely, as if trying to read his thoughts. Then she smiled gently and said, "You have grown, Zion. Not just in age, but in strength." Her simple words touched him deeply. He didn't reply immediately, but her voice stayed in his mind long after she walked away. Those words reminded him that people can see more in him than he sees in himself. That night, he sat alone on the rooftop, feeling the cool breeze and listening to the distant sounds of the town. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to think about his future. What did he really want? What kind of life did he hope for? He knew he could not stay the same forever. Life had given him challenges not to break him, but to guide him. He had survived everything, not by luck, but because of his courage and patience. Slowly, he started writing down his plans. He took an old notebook and began filling its empty pages with ideas. Some ideas were small, like helping the children in his neighborhood with their schoolwork. Others were big, like starting a small business or volunteering at different community projects. He didn't know where these ideas would lead him, but writing them down made him feel hopeful again. A few days later, he shared his thoughts with his parents. They listened carefully, surprised but proud. His father placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You have the strength to do more than you think. Whatever you choose, do it with honesty." His mother added, "The world becomes kinder when people like you don't give up." Their support gave him the confidence he had been missing. Zion then made the decision to start helping children in the nearby area who struggled with school. He remembered how difficult it had been for him during his own childhood. He knew how important guidance could be. The first day he offered to teach, only 3 children showed up. They were shy, unsure of what to expect. But Zion welcomed them warmly and made learning fun. He explained things slowly, used real-life examples, and encouraged them gently. By the end of the first week, more children started coming. Soon, his small teaching space was full every evening. Parents noticed the change. Their children came home smiling, showing improved marks, speaking with more confidence. Some parents thanked him personally, while others showed appreciation by bringing small gifts like fruit or homemade snacks. Zion never asked for anything, but these gestures filled him with happiness. He realized that helping others brought him a kind of peace he had never felt before. One afternoon, as he finished teaching, a man approached him. He introduced himself as the coordinator of a youth program in the town. He had heard about Zion's efforts and wanted to invite him to join their group. They organized workshops, awareness sessions, and community events aimed at helping young people develop skills and build confidence. At first, Zion hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready to take on something bigger, but after thinking for a day, he agreed. Joining the program gave him a new purpose. He met other young people who also wanted to do good for their community. Some had inspiring stories of their own. Others were still figuring out their path. Together, they worked on different projects, cleaning local parks, setting up small libraries, visiting elderly people who lived alone, and arranging career guidance sessions for students. Zion discovered that when people come together with positive intentions, change becomes possible. His confidence grew steadily. Every time he spoke to a group or helped someone solve a problem, he felt stronger inside. The challenges he had once feared didn't scare him anymore. He had learned from his past, and now he was using that knowledge to build something meaningful. But even as life moved forward, Zion did not forget the hard times he had gone through. He carried those memories with him, not as burdens, but as reminders of how far he had come. Whenever he met someone struggling, he spoke gently, offering support without judgment. He knew that sometimes, even a few kind words can help someone take a step forward. Months passed, and Zion's work began to get noticed outside his town as well. A local journalist visited him one day after hearing about his teaching and community projects. She spent hours talking to him, listening to his journey and taking notes. A week later, an article about his efforts was published. People from nearby towns started reaching out, asking for advice or inviting him to speak at events. Although he felt nervous at first, he accepted the invitations because he believed sharing his story might help someone else. He spoke honestly wherever he went. He talked about failure, fear, and pressure. But he also talked about courage, hope, and the importance of never giving up. Listeners appreciated his truthfulness. Many came forward after his talks to share their own worries and challenges. Zion listened carefully, offering encouragement just as others had once given him. Over time, Zion felt something growing inside him, a calm strength, a sense of clarity. He realized that life is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming better. It is about learning from mistakes, helping others, and staying true to your own heart. He also understood that when a person finds peace within themselves, they can spread peace to others. One day, as Zion walked through the marketplace, he saw a young boy sitting alone, looking worried. Zion sat beside him and asked what was wrong. The boy explained that he was afraid of failing his exams. Zion smiled gently and said, I understand that feeling. I had the same fear once. But fear becomes smaller when you try. Start with one step, and then take another. You are stronger than you think. The boy looked up, and for the first time, he smiled. That moment reminded Zion of why he continued doing what he did. Years later, when people in the town talked about him, they didn't mention his past struggles. They talked about how he helped children, supported families, and brought communities together. They talked about his patience, his kindness, and his willingness to listen. Zion became someone others trusted, someone they could turn to for guidance. But the truth was, Zion never thought of himself as extraordinary. He believed anyone could make a difference, if they acted with honesty and a kind heart. He had learned that real strength is not loud or aggressive. Real strength is quiet. It is found in kindness, patience, and understanding. It is found in choosing goodness even when the world feels uncertain. As he continued his journey, he still faced challenges, new ones, unexpected ones, but he no longer feared them. He welcomed them as part of life, knowing that every challenge teaches something valuable. And just like that, Zion kept moving forward, not with fear, but with hope. His story became a reminder for many that no matter how difficult life becomes, it can always be rebuilt with courage, kindness, and determination. And in the end, Zion discovered something beautiful. The greatest success is not measured by wealth or fame, but by the positive impact a person leaves on the hearts of others.